So you want a job at Google? Well, I can help you with that. To get a job at Google, there are 3 areas where you need to excel. You need to know how to land the interview, you need to know how to do the technical part of the interview, and then you need to know how to do the behavioral part of the interview. This week, I'm gonna help new grads figure out how to excel in all 3 ways. If you're currently in the industry and you're trying to switch over to Google, I'll upload a video next week talking about tips for you. To land an interview at Google, there are so many things you can do to boost your chances. As a new grad in college, you actually have way more choices on how you can approach this than you might think. The common advice you hear is to get somebody who worked at Google to recommend you. And while that can help a lot, especially if they're a good employee, that is not your only option. Because you're in school, you have the ability to join many student organizations at your school. As part of these organizations, you can help host technical workshops for the student body, and you can invite companies to come over and help with those workshops. This is a great opportunity for networking directly with recruiters. It's gonna just be you and them, you're gonna help them set up, you're gonna show off that you can properly lead an event, and it's gonna really help you gain their favor to try to get a resume to break through all of the noise. Something a lot of college students do when they're trying to land a job at Google is that they focus too much on the technical part of it. Now, while that is incredibly important, you won't get a chance to exercise your technical skills if you don't impress a recruiter. As a college student, you don't need to throw your resume into the void, otherwise known as a Google career portal. Instead, you can make a connection with a recruiter and have that be your way in. Ideally, you are trying to work with companies that are within the area that you want to work for, but Google is great for technical workshops. They love bringing engineers over to show off what we know because it helps them recruit the best and brightest minds. So really, this is a win-win for both. If your organization or your school does not regularly host these workshops, sometimes finding a contact that works at Google might be a little difficult. However, your school can sometimes help you. If you talk to your student organization lead at your school, they might be able to help get you in contact with a recruiter who is interested in working with your school. Keep in mind that when you are reaching out to these recruiters, they want to know recruitment metrics. So they might want to know the population of your school, if your school has any cool accolades, if there's any particular students that might be stand out. They want this information. You need to collect and present this information for them. Make their decision as easy as possible by making your school look as good as possible. Now, if for some reason your school can't help you find a contact, all hope is not lost. If you go to hackathons of other schools within your area, you can actually talk to the recruiters directly there, let them know that you're trying to host an event, and they might come out. Especially if you tell them they don't have to pay anything. Usually when companies host these workshops, they actually end up paying organizations to be able to set up booth there because they are trying to collect interest and resumes. If you're doing it for free, helping them set up and providing them great data on the student body, they will love this. And it's very likely that they'll say yes. Of course, sometimes they book out for the whole year, so they might not have time. It's still good to get a connection with the recruiter so that whenever there is an availability, you can help them set up the next event. If none of this is possible for you, maybe all the officer positions in the organizations in your school are booked for the year, and then maybe there's just not a great way for you to get into a leadership position in some sort of event, that is okay. As a college student, you have access to way more job fairs than anyone else. Getting Google's attention in a job fair is incredibly difficult. If you really want to stand out at a job fair, you really need to have an impressive project. Not just a class project, not something really small you did over the weekends in a hackathon, but something that really kind of blows everything out of the water. Having a great project that you can talk about passionately, you can really sell to a recruiter or engineer, will really get your name to kind of stand out there. If you're thinking, what kind of projects can I do? Think about something that has actual users. Maybe make an app for your student organization. Maybe just make something for fun, but that you envision could grow into something bigger. It doesn't actually have to grow. The point here is just to make something and show that you thought about the growth of the project. However, if you have actual users and you can put that as a metric, that would be even better. Something else is very important about your project. Don't make the title of your project exactly what your project is. Make it something incredibly memorable. I'm not talking about the one-word name that an app might be on the App Store. Unless your app is really well known, that's not gonna help. Make it something kind of out there. For example, one project I had on my resume that really stood out to recruiters was a project called Tinder for Twitch, which was just a recommendation algorithm to find Twitch streamers. But imagine if that's what I would have written as this title. No one would have cared. Recommendation algorithm for Twitch streamers, that doesn't stay in your brain. But Tinder for Twitch, oh, that's kind of funny. Are you dating Twitch streamers? No, but now you can talk about the project, you can talk about it from a product standpoint and from a technical standpoint, and you can really sell it. And as long as you sound very interested when you're talking about it, then it's gonna be infectious. And the recruiter and engineer might feel the same way. Now, if none of this works, you can't just go through the tried and true method of trying to find somebody to recommend you through Google. For things like internships and new grad positions though, this really does just carry a lot less weight than any of the other methods that I mentioned. While you can do this, I really would treat this more as like a last resort. Of course, the actual last resort is just to submit your resume and have nothing else going for you. If you submit your resume without any recommendation or any networking, you really have to be incredibly lucky to get past to the interview phase. However, let's assume you did. If you're enjoying this video, please subscribe. I know I'm giving good information here, and I would really love for you to support this channel. So when we're doing this behavioral interview, you want to focus on two things. One, being as charismatic as you've ever been in your life. I know as a nerd, speaking for myself, it is actually hard to be a little charismatic sometimes. It really does take a little bit of practice. You should practice these interview questions on your own and in front of other people. You should not be embarrassed. If you're still embarrassed to do mock interviews with your friends, that means you haven't done enough mock interviews. You should be able to roll these answers off the tongue with no embarrassment, just pure confidence. And for some people, that might be a little harder than others. That doesn't mean you should give up. You can do it. You don't have to be born charismatic. You don't have to be born confident. All you need to do is practice speaking. The second thing you should focus on is making sure that you're a team player. When Google does these behavioral interviews, they make sure to have your resume on hand. They read off your resume and they want to know more about the projects you put on there. Those projects are the reason that they had interest in you. And really what it boils down to is that they're just trying to make sure that what you're writing on your resume is something you actually did. They want to hear believable stories about your interactions with your teammates when creating these projects. Now, when you create a project, you might think, I just want to make a really cool app by myself. Unfortunately, while having these projects can be good, you should have at most one project that you make by yourself. The rest of the projects really should be teammate projects because you're going to be working as a team within Google, always. And they want to see not only that you can work well with other people, but that you might have some opportunity for growth, for leadership. You want to think about a few stories and you want to have these stories prepared before you get into the interview. You want to think about how you manage the work, how you split the work up, whether there was any issues with people not getting their work done or any arguments that your teammates got into, and how you resolve those. Before any interview, but especially a behavioral interview, you want to actually write down some story. You don't want to just go in and say, I have these stories in my head, I'm ready. You should write down a full story and then be able to adapt that story to any questions they ask. Ideally, you have at least 3 stories that you can adapt to any question. If you've looked at the STAR method, that's a great method for kind of organizing your thoughts, organizing your stories, and answering these behavioral questions. I really recommend looking into it, and there are amazing resources online for this already. So I'm not going to go too deep into it in this video. If you've heard the term Googliness, that is something that we actually measure at Google. And while in the beginning, it was kind of just a vibe check, at this point, we've standardized it a little bit so that it's actual metrics that we're looking into and grading. You can look up what being googly is and what those metrics are. I won't talk about each one in this video because that could be a whole video all on its own. But keep in mind that those are the metrics we're looking for most in a behavioral interview. But we do look for those in technical interviews as well. For a technical interview as a new grad, you're not going to be seeing the same questions that somebody from the industry might be seeing. Your question is going to be a lot more algorithm-based, a lot more general, not necessarily related to the role you're actually going to be doing. When you start interviewing for a role as a new grad, they actually don't even know what team you're going to be placed on. First, you have to interview just to see if you were at the coding standard that Google expects from their engineers. But then once you pass that, you go through a different hiring committee where managers are now choosing which new grads they might want to fill their spots with. When practicing for technical interviews, you really want to focus on a few things. One, whether you are technically proficient to solve a problem. That means that you really want to be able to solve leak code questions relatively easily, and that comes with practice. Something I see that goes wrong all the time when people practice leak code questions is that they'll get to a question, they won't know how to solve it, then they'll look it up, then they'll copy the code, and then they'll go on to the next question. While in the beginning, you might need to do this, you should very quickly wean off of this. If you don't struggle, it becomes a lot harder for you to retain that information in your brain. You can go through 100 questions and be worse than somebody who's gone through 30 questions. For you to build those pathways in your brain to actually learn how to solve these problems, you need to struggle. Your brain needs to find the pathway on its own. If all you do when you hit a dead end is look something up, then that's what you're teaching your brain. As soon as I hit a dead end, let's just look it up. However, during an interview, Google does not allow you to look things up. Now, of course, if you just don't remember, then you are gonna need to look it up. I'm not saying don't look up anything, but if you've already looked up this question, then go to another question that has a similar coding concept to this one, and then try to solve that one without looking at anything that you just looked up. Even if it takes you an hour, just try. If after an hour you can't figure it out, look it up. I don't want you to waste all day on it, but keep doing that until you can solve these questions with no help at all. And then give yourself a break, come back to it a few days later, and do the same thing until you can do it consistently. Now that's great for learning new concepts. However, when you're doing a coding interview with Google, they do things a little bit different than some other companies. They do something I like to call scaling questions. The interviewer has about 3 to 4 questions lined up. They don't necessarily expect to get to the 4th question, but they do generally expect to get to the 2nd or 3rd question. Once you practice learning the main concepts of programming, you want to start going into scaling type questions. Sometimes you can just have 3 different questions that are 3 different levels of difficulty, or you can have one question that if you add certain aspects to it, really change the difficulty up. Ideally, you want to get another friend of yours who's trying to get a job at Google as well, and give each other mock interviews. You should time them. They should be 30 to 50 minutes long, depending on how much time you have. And you should find one problem on LeetCode and then think about how you can make that problem slightly harder. Being an interviewer is just as helpful as being the interviewee in these questions, because you get to learn not only how other people think, but how they sound when they're trying to solve these problems. As an interviewer, your first few interviews, you might be a little scared, you might feel like you're not confident enough to even interview this question. I have a few things to say about that. One is, first of all, be able to solve the question on your own. Practice that question before you give it to somebody else. You should at least have a general idea of some of the possible solutions that an interviewer might get. A lot of people don't know when doing technical interviews is that a lot of times the interviewer is actually there to help you. If the interviewer notices that you're spending a lot of time going in the wrong direction, they're gonna try to give you subtle hints to try to get you away from there. If you're in the middle of talking and the interviewer says something, I know it's very scary to lose your train of thought and listen to what they're saying, but that's actually a very important part to the interview. There's a good chance they're really trying to steer you to get the correct answer. The last thing you really need to know when doing these technical interviews is that one of the things the interviewer is looking for is your ability to explain your solution. I think that's best done through the process. You need to explain your thought process as you're thinking. Now, this is an acquired skill. It is not easy. Talking and coding is very difficult, but it's a skill that will really help you stand out. Of course, not everyone does that. At my college, we had one of the best programming teams in the world. And whenever I would give mock interviews to those people, they usually wouldn't explain as they were coding. But I honestly thought this interview felt worse than some of the people who were worse at programming than them. They were incredibly fast, and then towards the end, they could kind of explain what they were doing, but it was just so boring as an interviewer to just kind of sit there, watch them go click, 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 not say anything for like 5-10 minutes, and then at the end, then kind of just give me a quick little rundown. I felt like I wasn't getting as much information about their thought process. I don't know if they just had this memorized. This takes time and practice. Sometimes it's even good to record yourself. You might think that you sound a certain type of way, but when you look at your own recording, you're gonna think, oh wow, that is not at all the way I thought it was gonna be. These are all the tips that I have. Of course, there are so many more things you could do. I could have got into how you could structure your resume. I could have got into what specific types of coding algorithms you should know. However, I felt like my advice is particularly useful for new grads. I don't hear this advice very often, and it really helped me a lot when I got my job at Google. If you watch this video and you're working in industry and you want to get a job at Google, next week I'm going to be uploading a video for anyone who's not a new grad applying to Google and how you can get into it. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and comment. I have a goal of hitting 1 million subscribers in 1 year, and I need your help to do it.